think focus is a muscle, right? And I don't think it's something you have, it's something that you do, and you could flex that muscle. And that's one of the reasons why I personally choose not to touch my phone the first half an hour of the day. Because when you wake up in the morning, you know, and you're in this relaxed state of awareness, you're very suggestible. The first thing you do is pick up your phone, which has access to the world's information, and you're just context switching for thousands and thousands of times, and you know, in a very short period of time. You know, you're rewiring your brain, number one, for distraction, right? We talked about that. But you're also rewiring your brain for reaction, right? Because every, I don't know, voicemail, text message, email, whatever, could put you in a mood that could hijack your mood. But in the beginning, like, you know, when you say you want to practice mindfulness in the morning, that's not very mindful, right? Just sharing, you know, switching from context.
You mean
to context,
mindfully reading Instagram posts is not that mindful?
Well, even when I have people like, you know, brush their teeth, trying it with the opposite hand, it's not just about, you know, the cross lateral and potentially, you know, engaging a different part of their brain. Yes, that's, but it's also a gateway habit that allows, wow, if I could brush my teeth with the opposite hand, what else can I add in terms of stack my habits? But also, you're not going to be good at it at the beginning, so it forces you to be mindful. So mindfulness doesn't have to be regulated just to meditation. We could bring mindfulness to when we eat, right? We could do it to everything. And then if you're eating with the opposite hand, as an example, right, then it forces you to be present, right? And for me, I like that feeling, as opposed to, you're right, it's not just what you eat, it's how you eat, right? And a lot of people are working while they're eating, so they're not in that parasympathetic rest and digest place. And so they're probably not even getting a lot of, you know, what they could get out of consuming. And I'll go into the reading in a moment. Just on the consumption part, in the morning, like another framework I use for my day, and it's not perfect, right? All these are like little filters. Generally, I like to keep the morning free. And of course, there's other things. Doctor appointments, I have to, you know, do this for my child. I have to do, you know, have this other podcast interview. But generally in the mornings, I like to create. I found for me, my brain mode in the morning is to be creative. So I want to output. In the afternoon, I tend to consume. And that's where I tend to do some study, read for a podcast, listen to a podcast, have conversations with people. I tend to consume information. So I'm putting information in. And then the last, where I create, consume, in the evening, I want to clear. And that's what I'm trying to do. So I want to clear my mind, meaning I want to write down the things I have to do the next day, maybe so I could get it out of my mind so I don't have to ruminate about it. Or maybe I'll use some yoga nidra and just do some breathing meditation to clear, you know, my mind. Or maybe I'll journal and I'll just write it, or I'll talk to my wife and talk about what I did that day to clear my mind.
Fan of journaling?
What's that?
Are you a fan of journaling?
I am.
Why is it good for our brain?
So for me, I journal at two different times. I tend to journal in the morning and in the evening. That's my personal preference. And people could find their own way and figure out what works. In the morning, I have this gratitude practice. I really think it's important. So many people actually will tell me that I'll do a gratitude practice when I have something to be grateful for, and something to that nature. And I was like, okay, that's interesting, because I don't think you have to. And that's what I told this specific person. I was like, maybe you don't have to wait for a greater life to feel grateful. Maybe if you feel grateful, you'll have a greater life. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because I'm always like, just like the responsibility and power and reversing, and I just find that's kind of my thinking style. Because I think that for people to feel, how are you going to have more if you don't appreciate what you have? I know so many people, even clients that have a lot, that they're just not very happy people. Some of them are miserable because they don't even appreciate, you know, the things. And I think if people want to feel truly wealthy, a mental exercise I do is, you know, write down all the things you have in your life that money can't buy. You know, if you could hear this right now, what are you willing to, would you give up your hearing for a certain amount of money or whatever, right? Or a thought experiment like, what if the only things you had in your life tomorrow were the things you express gratitude for today? Not wrote it down, but actually express gratitude for the people or the things, you know. And I just feel like gratitude is just such a healing emotion. Yeah. You know, it's just like, it trains my nervous system that there's enough, you know. And I think honestly, my experience has been what you appreciate appreciates. Meaning what you appreciate in your life tends to appreciate, meaning enhances or gets or grows.
Yeah.
And so that's what I want to have it, that makes me feel good. And it also puts me in that kind of parasympathetic. So I tend to do gratitude in the morning and night, and it helps me for me to journal because everybody has a different process than sometimes you can imagine, but I like writing it down.
I mean, I very much echo those views about journaling. For me also, it's a morning and evening practice. In the morning, it's about gratitude. It's about setting an intention for the day. Similar practices, maybe worded slightly differently, about trying to frame the day you want to have. It's about intention, right? It's about not living a reactive life, not being passive. It's about being active and about trying to generate the experience of life that you want. And then in the evening, you call it clearing, which is a really nice way to think about it. It's about sort of reflecting on the day. Like an athlete would always have a coach and reflect on their performance, right? That's how they get better. They assess, they go, yeah, but you can improve here. Yeah. Great, I can tweak it there. That's how they get better, right? That's how they become a high performer. But we all want high performance in our life, whether it's high performance as a father, as a mother, as a work colleague. We all want those things. And so I kind of feel a process of reflection is very, very important for us daily if you can. Yeah. I'm very biased towards analog things, right? Mm-hmm. I think as the world becomes more and more digital, you've been in my kitchen, you've been in my house, it's a very analog setup intentionally. Yeah. In fact, me and my wife are currently having a discussion about a smart TV. I'm reluctant to get one because I want to make the behaviors that I don't want to engage in myself, or I don't want my kids engaging in, I want them to be difficult to do at home. Mm-hmm. I don't want them to be easy. So I'm saying if we get a brand new spanking TV where things work, currently we've got this old version box where Netflix takes like 5 or 6 minutes to load. It's a bit slow. I love it because that friction to do that behavior will often mean it doesn't happen. Yeah. Right. So as the world becomes more and more digital, I personally like to set up things in an analog way at home, and I like to write in nice journals that feel good. And I wanted to ask you before we go back to sort of reading, like as a brain coach, as a memory coach, as someone who's spent over 30 years now helping people with the stuff, is the act of writing it down in your mind different from typing it into, let's say, an app in your phone? I mean, I've seen some research supporting that it is. Yeah. What's your perspective on that?
That's been my experience also as well, especially with our students and the feedback that we get. We have students in every country in the world, 195 nations, and people vastly prefer handwriting than typing, digital. Let's take note-taking, right? We know that there's a learning curve, but there's also a forgetting curve, that when you hear something on a podcast or in a lecture, you can lose upwards of 80% of it within the first 48 hours. But in order to mitigate that, capturing it, is certainly great. Now, digital is great for storing. It's great for ease of sharing with your team or your family, right, in files. But actually, when students are tested for the things that matter, comprehension, retention, handwriting notes surpasses digital note-taking. And I'll give you one reason why, is a lot of people are pretty good typers, and they could type as fast as you and I are speaking, but you can't possibly handwrite that fast. Mm-hmm. So what does it do? It forces you to filter. Yeah. Like, is this important, and organize the information? So you're not just, because the worst way of taking notes is having everything verbatim. That's not helping anybody, right? All the research has, shown that keywords are more important than just having a transcript of given that. It certainly helps to read it, but if you could pull out information and do practice retrieval and test yourself and teach somebody else, you're going to learn it way far better. But I prefer lifestyle more analog because I don't need another reason to get on a screen. Yeah. It's a little bit hard when I'm traveling because I like to read. So, I can't necessarily bring 5 books, traveling on it with a carry-on or something like that. But I'm very tactical. And also I do like handwriting because even in just thinking about it logically, right? Leadership or innovation, it's an inside-out process, right? You're taking something invisible in your mind and you're making it visible. like an invention or one of your books, right, or a podcast. You're taking something in your mind before it actualizes in the physical environment. And I love handwriting something, and I've always been like this, because it's the first step of making something in your mind visual on the outside.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beginning. That's the first step of the creation process. Going back to the conversation about reading speed, how do you read? So right now we have the right mindset, right? The leaders are readers, that reading is your mind, would exercise your body. You have purpose, so you're not reading without intention, right? P times E times S3. And the methodology is, okay, so first of all, I want to make it easy. Just like you were saying, like, you don't want to get a smart TV and you want Netflix to load in split second because you want to make it difficult. And that's part of, designing habits, proper habits. You want to make the things that are not good for you more difficult. Like if you don't have your phone on your nightstand, when you're sleeping, then you're not going to pick it up, right?
Yeah.
It's like putting it in your bathroom is probably a safer place, and just like doing the things I put a kettlebell and a chin-up bar, right, at the entrance of my office. And I'm just like, I see it and it was just easy to do, just like you do something when you're making your coffee.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, why not make the good things that are good for you easy to do and the things that are not good for you more difficult? So if you are going to get that thing, that alcohol, whatever, why don't you put it in the basement in a very difficult place? So you have to, oh man, I don't want to go all the way downstairs and do that, or that candy bar or whatever, or just not have it in your home, which makes it a lot easier. Just like if not good with bread, like it doesn't agree with you and you're at a dining table, and they bring you bread, you could either look at that bread and say no 20 times in your mind throughout that whole evening, or you could just say no when they bring it to you, and then you don't have to say no every single time, use up all that 100%. Energy and tension.
Yeah.
So going back to the power of purpose, I'm the same way with my reading, right? And I set up my environment just like you do. I have books specifically around, and I do read multiple books at a time. And I'm a big fan, especially the past few years, of reading fiction books. It's a lot of times I obsess about nonfiction. I'm like, what's the purpose in this? I want to read books on on neuroscience, adult learning theory, and I've seen so many benefits of reading fiction, and even research shows it improves empathy, character development, imagination, problem solving, pattern recognition. It also improves your EQ. Where reading maybe something else is your IQ, this is more your emotional quotient. And so I also schedule my reading. And so I'll say this. So I mentioned that it takes about, if you're a basic reader, 200 words per minute, then you get through a book 45 minutes a day. So I schedule that, and I recommend everyone schedule. Because if you don't schedule your workout or you don't schedule your meditation, we schedule parent-teacher meetings and doctor's appointments and investor meetings or client team meetings, whatever, but we're not scheduling our own growth.
So you've said, I think before, reading is a workout for your mind. Is that what you said?
I think reading is to your mind what exercise is to your body.
So then if we use that analogy and go, you scheduled your physical workouts, you need to also schedule your mental workouts. Yeah,
and I think some people don't schedule the physical workouts and they don't get to it. And so because life fills up those voids. And then it's at night and it's after dinner, like, oh, I forgot to work out, or I just don't have the energy to work out. And that's the thing, is prioritizing the most important things, keep the most important things. And I think top of that is self-care, and self-care is not just, working out. I think also part of self-care is self-love. We started that in the beginning of the conversation, that part of our journey is, looking in the mirror and falling in love with that person looking back that's been through so much, but is still standing, right? Just like how you're saying, if you love yourself, you're not going to, if you really deeply care about yourself, you're not going to do things that would potentially harm it by eating certain things or otherwise, just like you wouldn't do that things for someone you love, and just if you love somebody else. And I would say no amount of love from somebody else is going to give your soul what it needs from you, right? The love and caring and compassion you need from you. And I'm not saying it's easy, right? And it's this whole thing, nothing I'm saying is necessarily easy. I would say it's simple, but simple doesn't mean easy, right? And so what I would do is schedule it, because if you don't schedule, I think the number one productivity performance tool we have is our calendar. right? But if you don't put it down in your calendar, it's likely not going to get done. So I would schedule that 45 minutes or 20 minutes of reading, whatever you're committed to, also as well. When you have a book, if you're reading, okay, so you prefer analog, and if you're watching this on video, I'm just grabbing my book,
Yeah.
so like even basic things, right? When I'm looking at this, and I open up the book, when I'm looking at it at this angle here, so I'm taking the book and I have it flat on the table. For those who are just listening to this, if I'm looking at this angle from where I'm sitting upright, then the words appear smaller at this angle because I'm looking at it at an angle. And now some people, what they'll do unconsciously to make it easier for them to read is they'll slump over like this so they could see the words better. But when I did that, what happens? I go into this kinesthetic posture, which is slower than visual posture. I collapse my diaphragm, which we talked about is also the key to getting more oxygen to your brain. That's why people fall asleep when they're reading, often because of their physiology is affecting their psychology. I would also say when you're reading something and you're going through enjoying this, number one, have an intention. Why are you reading this book? Because the fastest way to read something is not to read it at all. Right. So if you ever read a page in a book and got to the end, just like nothing registers, maybe you don't have questions. Going back to the reticular activating system, how a part of it is initialized by questions. So it's kind of like a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, my sister would send me these pictures and email postcards of a very specific kind of dog, breed of dog, pug dogs, right? These kind of smushy, fun dogs with smushy faces. And they're very compliant. You could dress them as like ballerinas and they're just, whatever. And I was like, why? My question was, why is she sending me these? And she's a good marketer because she's seeding because her birthday is coming up, right? And I was like, okay. And funny thing happened when I started asking the question, I started seeing these pug dogs everywhere. Like I'd be at the grocery store checking out and the person in front of me is holding a pug dog. And I'm running in my neighborhood and somebody's walking 6 pug dogs on a leash. And my question for everyone listening is, did these pug dogs magically appear in my neighborhood? And no, of course not. But I wasn't paying attention because, again, your brain is primarily a deletion device, right? So we're not shining a spotlight. And so it's in the dark for us. And so, but once I started asking the question, I just started seeing the pug dogs everywhere. And so my question for everyone listening is, what are your dominant questions? My dominant question was, how do I be invisible? So I got really good ideas on how to shrink and not be seen in class. And that was my result. A dominant question I talk about in the book is a friend of mine found out her dominant question out of the 60,000 thoughts. Some of them are questions. The one she asks all the time, how do I get people like me? And you don't know anything about her, but her career, where she lived, but you know a lot about her. Someone's obsessed with how do I get this person to like me? That's the question they're asking. What's their life like? Their personality? They're a martyr. People take advantage of them. They're a sycophant. Their personality changes depending on who they spend time with because they want to be liked. And it's interesting, like you don't know anything about her, but you know a lot about her because you know the question. And my principle here that I'm talking about, questions are the answer. Like the example I put into the book with Will Smith, I train a lot of actors how to speed read scripts, memorize lines, and I'll give you some of the speed reading tips in a moment, just because these illustrations, these stories stick with people. We were brain training during the day. We're in Toronto in the winter. In the evening, he's shooting his movie, right? Superhero movie. And it is cold. And it is not, people think it's very sexy and very thrilling to be on a movie set, but it's really just people are just waiting all the time. And during this waiting outside, his family's there. And I'm there outside and we're freezing, just kind of watching these monitors underneath this tent. And he's bringing us hot chocolate that he made himself, even though there's a crew that can make it for him. And he's cracking jokes and telling stories. And I found out earlier that day, his dominant question is, how do I make this moment even more magical? How do I make this moment even more magical? And I realized that evening, he was demonstrating that question at that time by making the hot chocolate and cracking. He's just bringing more magic into it, and my dominant question could be like, what's the best use of this moment? Right. I mean, you read the book 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. He says like, if you had to reach your 10-year goal, but you were only given 6 months to do it, how would you go about doing it? And you ask a different question, you're going to get a way different answer, right? And so my question for everyone listening, what do you think your dominant question is? Because that determines your focus, and that focus determines how you feel and what you do and what you experience in your life.
Do you have your dominant question?
Yeah, for the longest time, it was, how do I make this better? Because remember, I felt like I was broken. So my dominant question came out of my struggle. So I was like, how do I make this better? Right?
It's a very empowering question, that, isn't it?
It is, because then I start shining a light and saying, oh, there's a pug dog, there's a pug dog, there's the answer, there's the answer, there's the answer.
But even within the question is the energy of agency. Like, it's built into the question. That's why for me it's such a wonderful question.
Yeah.
You can't adopt a victim mindset with a question like that.
Yeah, and that's great. I got goosebumps again, because that's, again, I call them truth bumps, because the presupposition is you do have the power to make it better, right? And so people could ask a question like, how do I make the most of this moment, right? The 3 questions I ask when I read, going back to reading nonfiction, preparing for a podcast: how can I use this? Why must I use this? When will I use this? So think about the power if you're reading something and not normally getting, maybe 10% of what you think you could get out of it. If you start reading something, a book on health and wellness, on glucose, and whatever you happen to be reading, how can I use this? Then you're like, oh, there's a pug dog, there's a pug dog, there's a pug dog, right? Just like when I teach students how to do well in standardized tests, like reading comprehension, I always tell them, go read the questions at the end first, and then start reading the reading comprehension. Then you're like, because then you know what the author is looking for. Then you have answer, there's answer, there's answer. Why read all this, get to the end, and you're like, oh, that's what was important, right? And so you ask your questions. So in the beginning of my book, every single chapter starts with 3 primary questions to activate their reticular activating system. So they're looking for that answer. So when they read it, they're like, oh, there's a pug dog, there's a pug dog, there's a pug dog. So 3 questions I ask every day of my life, especially when I'm in learning mode: how can I use this? Right? Then I'm like, there's the answer there. I could use it this way, this way, this way, this way. Why must I use it? So it goes from my head to my heart. So I have purpose, right? I think about all the rewards and how my business, my podcast will be better, my book will be better. How can I use this? Why must I use it? Because without reasons, you won't get the results. Just like asking, why do I remember the person's name? And then I say, when will I use this? And that's the scheduling. Because going back to the lie, limited idea, entertain, that knowledge is power. It's not. It's potential power, becomes power when we utilize it. I have a primary belief that every hour you spend listening to a podcast like this, to be fair, you should spend an equal hour putting it into action, right? Every hour you spend reading a book, every hour you spend in a lecture, you should spend an equal hour putting it into play, right? And I think that, because otherwise nothing happens. If nothing changes, nothing changes, right? I want to get really like fundamental. And then when will I use this? And then I schedule it. I'm like, oh, this is a great thing. I know why I should use this. And then I schedule like, oh, I'm going to do this, do this, add this part to my podcast here.
So one of the ways in which people can get better at reading is by asking the right questions beforehand.
Yeah.
Like what I'm thinking about is, let's say someone's bought a book that they heard a guest on a podcast, so I'm going to buy that book.
Yeah.
But the book hasn't been read yet. But they took the action, they bought it. And some days they're trying to look at it and they're probably reading the same page over and over again, and they just can't move forward with it. So why might that be? Well, I don't know. To me, it's like, okay, you could be tired, right? Yeah. So nothing's going in that day. It could be that the book was poorly written, right? So therefore, it's not you. It's actually the book isn't that well written, which does happen. Or I'm guessing it could be that you've not primed yourself in the right way to read it. Is that sort of how you would look at it?
And built in everything you just said, again, personal responsibility and agency, and it's there. Even if it's not a book and it's a lecture, I'll notice I'll control my state. Like I go to a lot of conferences. I speak for a good part of my living, and I can be on 3 continents in 1 week. We're in front of 250,000 people a year, usually at live events. And I could be sitting in the audience waiting to go on, and somebody else is speaking on something in the industry. And I can see the effect by looking at people around me as they're falling asleep, right? We've all been at lectures like this or even in school. And I'll take agency. I honestly, God will do this. Just not because I'm so enlightened. It's just I don't want to be bored, right? I want to control how I feel because I'm a thermostat. I'm not a thermometer. I don't want to be bored just because I'm reacting to people. And I'll change my mindset. I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. How's this dude like putting everybody to sleep all at the same time? And I'll actually get curious and I'll get energized thinking about that. But that's how I'll entertain myself. Even, or if I'm in a movie and I have to stay in the movie and I don't want to leave because I have family there or friends, I'll just like think about other things about how I could apply this and use this and so on. Because I'll take responsibility for how I feel and what I'm thinking and what I'm doing. We could always control our mindset, our motivation, which are our feelings, and the methods, our behaviors.
So the same situation's going on, but your experience of that situation now becomes very different, doesn't it?
Very, very good. And not written, just like if a book is poorly written, I could try to find the gems there, or I could take responsibility and say, this is not book, it's not for me. And that's still my agency. I could walk out of that movie or walk out of that speech or anything else. So I start with having the right questions and have purpose. Like I read with intention or I listen with intention, right? People aren't randomly listening to your show. They could because they like you, right? And they know you offer value, and they would get even more if they thought like, oh, like what are the kind of questions that I have so I could have, because you pull information inside here by asking questions, right? And if you don't have those questions, nothing's going to register because you can't push information to somebody's head, right? A podcast can't push information, but you could pull it in.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jim. I've maybe for 2 or 3 years now on the audio version, so not the YouTube version, on the audio version when I record my outros, I always say, what's one thing you can take away from this conversation and start applying into your life? And I do that very intentionally because it's like, okay, you've heard a lot.
Yeah.
You've hopefully been inspired, but let's just make it one thing. What's one thing you can take away and apply? But as I was researching you for this conversation, you talk about the importance of, you've already mentioned how much we retain, how much we forget within 48 hours. And you talk about the importance of teaching it when you teach it to someone else. So I was thinking maybe for next season, I might tweak my outro to be, instead of just one thing you can apply, and what's one thing you can teach someone else about what you learned? Do you think that would make a difference?
Yeah, I think both make it maybe rich, but if you want to single one out, and people could test this because everyone's a little bit different, but I learned so I could teach, right? And I have a philosophy that when you teach something, you get to learn it twice. And I also feel like we teach the things we most want to learn. That's a different subject because I was a poor learner, right? And my struggle became my strength. And so I teach other people how to learn. I think that if you give someone an idea, you enrich their life. But if you teach someone how to learn, they can enrich their own life. Kind of like that owl, learn how to fish. Yeah. And so what I would say is, yeah, absolutely. If you want to learn, okay, so when you're reading this book, have a purpose for doing so. Notice that, I just want to close this out, that if I'm not going to bend my body, and if you're not watching this in video, I have the book again on the tabletop, and I'm in visual posture, meaning I'm upright and I'm breathing properly, and I don't want to see it at an angle. So instead of collapsing my body, I just want to close this loop. Then you can just move the book, right? So now I could see the book, and at an angle, I can even rest it on the table or rest it on my knee.
And that makes a difference.
It does, because over time, especially if you're reading faster, part of what keeps people reading slowly is just visual fatigue. Yeah. Right. So if the book is at an angle, then the words are smaller, so more difficult to read logically. Yeah. But if they're tilted towards me, then all of a sudden they are noticeably larger and easier to read. Right.
Yeah, I love that.
And then I have questions, that I'm asking. So then I say, oh, there's an answer, there's an answer, there's an answer. So I never get in a situation where I read something and I just forget what I just read or didn't understand it. It just like time passed in one eye out the other or whatever. And then I'm asking questions. Now that's for smart reading. But for speed reading, if you want greater speed, like all we teach is not skimming or scanning. Like we work with a lot of attorneys, a lot of financial advisors, a lot of medical doctors. You don't want your doctor to get the gist of what they're reading, right? I don't. So, so a lot of traditional speed reading is scanning, skipping words, getting the gist of what you read, right? And that's never worked for me because I started as a memory trainer. So one of the ways you can improve your reading speed is, first of all, get your base rate, all right? So I would say, put a mark in the margin, pick up a book that you're reading or a brand new book, put a little mark in the margin where you're starting currently today. It might be somewhere in there. And then read for 60 seconds. Set a timer, your phone, to go down for 60 seconds and have it ring, and then put a mark in the margin where you left off. So in 60 seconds. And then count the number of lines you just read. And it counts, you could guesstimate, right? So if there's 2 words in a line, don't count it as a line. And then you have your lines per minute, right? That's how many lines you read in a minute. And you could easily also kind of approximate how many words there are per line. And most books, you'll find about 10 words per line, right? If I was to count or average the average number of words per line, about 10. So let's say you go through and you read like 20 lines to simplify it in 60 seconds, 200 words per minute, right? And that's, by the way, about the average reading speed, about 200, 250 words per minute. Now, if I ask you to pick up where you left off and put the clock on 60 seconds again, pick up where you left off, but just do one thing different, is what I'm going to ask you to do is just underline the words with your finger or a pen. You're actually not marking it, but just like use it as a visual pacer. And a visual pacer could be a pen, a highlighter, a mouse on a computer, right? I use my finger because everyone carries them with them.
To make sure you're taking action after watching this video, I've created a free breathing guide that's going to help you reduce stress, calm your mind, and boost your energy. In this guide, I share with you 6 really simple breathing practices that work immediately. Even just 1 minute a day will start to make a big difference. To receive your free guide, all you have to do is click on the link in the description box below.
Right? So you don't have to worry about them. You have them at all times. If you just underline the words, right? You don't even have to touch the page. And you did that for 60 seconds and count the number of lines you just read, that second number will be on average 25, 50% or more.
So, okay, I love this. So you read one section to get your baseline.
Right.
Then you're not rereading that.
No.
You go into a new section.
So you're putting a mark in the margin where you start and where you end, count the number of lines, and you have your base rate.
And then the second time, all you're doing is as you're reading the new piece of, or the new words,
where you left off.
You're just underlining with your finger.
Yeah. You're just going
keywords.
Under 9. You're not, exactly. You're just going left to right, left to right, left to right, right, left to right, back to left, and not right. And you're just...
Not everything, just keywords.
No, you're not marking it. You're just literally using your finger and going right underneath and like this. Exactly.
The whole
like
thing?
This. Yes, just like this. And you're just following your eyes across the page like this.
Wow.
I'm telling you, you don't have to believe everything I'm saying. Everyone, listen, just pick up a book and do it, and then count the number of lines you did, even without practice. You haven't even practiced this. But if you practice it, it'll even be more. And I'll tell you why, logically, because as human beings, we want the explanatory schema, the reasons why. A couple of reasons. First of all, kids naturally, when they're learning to read, will use their finger while they read to help them to focus. Until, depending on what kind of school system you want, you got unique feedback. Some people got a ruler to their hand or whatever because, they wanted, and I'm not saying that there's a conspiracy trying people not to use their finger because they want to keep people ill-informed or anything. I'm not saying that. But if you just use it's interesting, kids organically will use their fingers to help them focus. Interesting also, we do it. So when you do this, notice when I ask you to count the number of lines you just read, everyone will start doing what? Using their finger to point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or a pen. 1, 2, 3, because you're using a visual pacer to count because you know it helps you to focus. So why not use that while you read? The third reason why you use your finger while you read, or a visual pacer, again, you could be using a pen across. You're not marking it, right? You're just going right above the line, is because your eyes are attracted to motion. Because as hunter and gatherers, like if you're in a bush and you're hunting lunch, right? There's a rabbit there, or there's carrot, whatever your lunch is, right? If a bush next to you moves, you have to look at what moves because that's survival. Number one, it could be lunch, or number two, you could be lunch, right? So you have to look at what moves in your environments. And so when you're underlining the words across the page, left to right and back and forth, your eyes are being pulled through the information as opposed to your attention being pulled apart. Right. And the other reason why, because right now, if someone just walked across the room that we're in, everyone would look, even people watching on video, right? You and I, all of us, because your eyes are attracted to motion. So when your finger is going across the page, your attention is being pulled through it and it maintains your focus. But another reason, that wasn't reason enough, it's how your neurology is set up. Certain senses work very closely together. So for example, do you love like a fresh piece of fruit, like not like right off the vine, right from the farmer's market, not something that's been sprayed and waxed and sitting in a store for 6 months, but something
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
have you ever tasted a great tasting peach?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in actuality, we're not tasting that peach. We're what are we doing? We're smelling that peach. The tongue is not capable of really tasting what a peach tastes like, but the sense of smell and taste are so closely linked that your mind can't perceive the difference. It can perceive the difference when we're sick. If your nose is congested, what do a lot of foods taste like? Tastes bland, right?
Yeah.
Because your sense of smell and taste are so closely linked.
Wow.
So is your sense of sight and your sense of touch in your nervous system. So like if like you know,
That makes sense.
we have a newborn baby. You know, if I was and starting to like, you know, grasp. But if you're going to infant and take your keys and just shook the keys in front of the infant, or you know, who understands, and say, look at these keys. What would the child naturally do? Grab them, right? Because that they associate looking with touching, right? In fact, when people read using their finger, they say they feel more in touch with their reading over time. Oh, here's another way. If someone loses their sense of sight, how do you read? You braille, touch, right? And so I would encourage everyone to do is just a kind of a quick tip, because obviously, you know, we do trainings, 30-day
you do
trainings.
full courses that people can sign up for.
Yeah, 10 minutes a day for 30 days, and we'll triple anyone's reading speed with much better comprehension. But even if you just underline the words while you read, you'll feel not only greater speed, it'll lift to 25, 50%, but you'll feel more in touch with your reading also as well, especially if you're adding the questions and everything else we talked about. And so I would say everyone could experiment with that. If people, can I give a link?
Yeah, sure.
If people go to jimkwik.com/more, KWIK.com/more, there's actually a free 1 hour masterclass where I'll actually work and walk you through it. You bring a book online and I'll show you how to do this visually, and I'll show you some really cool shortcuts, but that will boost your reading speed 25, 50%. And that's not a little bit, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
Right? If they say time is money, how many people got a 25, 50% return on their investments last year, right? So it really adds up over time, and little by little, a little becomes a whole lot. There are 9 elements, with including time management, to be able to get the most out of the day. And I feel like that's what most of us want. And so we could go through it really very quickly.
Let's go through it.
I encourage everyone who's listening to take some notes also. There's this learning curve, but there's also this forgetting curve. Sometimes when we hear something, we forget it the next day. So using the acronym Limitless. All right. So these are the areas of management to really improve your productivity, your performance, and I believe your peace of mind. And so the L in Limitless is learning management. So this is learning management. If you want to get the most out of the day, I feel part of that day has to be spent in your own growth. I feel like we're most happiest when we're growing and when we're giving, meaning that just like in nature, everything grows, it's green and it grows, or it's brown and it rots, right? And everything has to give back to the ecosystem. Otherwise, it's eliminated. And so I think we learn more so we have more to be able to share. I call them grow givers. We grow so we have more to give, as opposed to go-getters back in the 80s. It was very, get. And then you could give also, but then you become a martyr. But I think you grow so you have more to be able to share, right?
Okay.
And so learning management is prioritizing learning in the day, because some people feel like learning is done. The 2 dips that we see in cognitive performance is usually when people graduate school and when they retire.
Yeah.
Meaning when they retire, a lot of times they retire their mind. They don't use their mind as much. And unfortunately, their body isn't far behind. But also some people associate learning just to school and education. They don't realize it's a lifelong process. But then when they graduate school, like, great, my learning is done. And then they don't use their minds as much. So, for example, we have a to-do list. I think it's very important to have a to-learn list each day. And I think it's very important every month to learn something new, because that's the human mind is the ultimate adaptation tool.
What does that actually mean practically? And I guess what I'm getting at is, and I'm really conscious of this now with this podcast, is each week I talk to incredible people and
Yeah.
they're sharing ideas and their perspective and little tips and tricks that people can use.
Yeah.
But I imagine sometimes it can be overwhelming and people can think, yeah, but all these things sound amazing, right? I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to learn Spanish. I want to, go to the gym and work on my zone 2 and my high intensity. And I also want to see my wife and my children and my job, right?
Yeah.
So a learning to-do list, just sort of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah.
How simple can that be for someone?
So Benjamin Franklin used to have something he called the 5-hour rule, where it's learning an hour a day for 5 days that week. And now everybody could change it, right? It could be 30 minutes, it could be more than an hour and so on. But
It could even be 10 minutes, right?
exactly. I mean, because again, our value in society is it's not like it was thousands of years ago or even hundreds of years ago, where it's our muscle power. Today, it's our mind power, right? It's our ability to solve problems, our ability to think, to be able to come up with solutions and innovations. It's not our brute strength. Today, it's our brain strength. But our brain, our mind only expands, but with new ideas and new lessons, right? Through neuroplasticity and so on, through novelty and nutrition. So the idea here is you have a to-learn list, so you are very clear on learning outcomes, because any skill, knowledge, skill, and ability you could adapt, right? So the idea here is just that genius is not born, it's built systematically through discipline, through focus, through proper training or coaching. Mm-hmm. And so let's say you have a to-learn list, I think, for me, it's reading. That's my go-to. I think reading is in the last episode, we did a whole masterclass on speed reading and smart reading, right? So I definitely think people should listen to that. But on my to-learn list are things that I want to challenge myself, new knowledge, skills, and abilities, so I can be more valuable in my society and for my team, for my family, and so on. So how does that work out functionally? I think the most important thing is you schedule that, because you schedule things, but we don't always schedule our personal growth. Or some people don't even schedule their workouts and they never get to it and they wonder why, because it wasn't on. I think the number one productivity tool we have is our calendar, right? You put doctor's appointments, or you put meetings or investor meetings, PTA, teacher meetings with your kids, but we're not scheduling our learning as much. So I like to schedule our learning. It could be podcasts, it could be audiobooks, it could be coaching, it could be reading books. My preference is to read. I'm like you, I like to read analog, not on screens. But I will listen to an audiobook and a podcast. I just have to do it at faster speed because of time, right? And so my to-learn list, I have a dedicated time that I want to learn. I read every single day. I mentioned in the previous episode, in the morning I create, in the afternoon I consume, in the evening I clear. So it's a way of, we could talk about other elements that's coming up in the acronym. But, my consumption time is the time I'm reading and learning. Yeah. I'm listening to the shows.
So the L of Limitless is learning and...
learning management. Yeah. So these are all going to be 9 management systems, if you will.
Yeah. And I love what you said, that they're about productivity, performance, and peace of mind.
Yeah. And even prosperity. When you put these together, I think people, when we're done with it, they'll see how this can relate to all the treasures of their life.
The 4 Ps there, Limitless. I remember in our first conversation, you used lots and lots of mnemonics. Mm-hmm. Just a quick detour from Limitless for a minute. Why do you use mnemonics so often? Is it so that you can remember things clearly, you can solidify them, you can learn them? Because when you have to go through the creative process of making the mnemonic, you're presumably locking it into your brain. So maybe expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, for both reasons. I come up with these mnemonics because a lot of us in school, they were very effective in memorizing certain things like the colors of the rainbow or the planets, or in the U.S., you have the Great Lakes, HOMES, the acronym HOMES, Lake Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior, right? Or Roy G. Biv, or for the colors of the rainbow.
Yeah, we did a medical school one for the cranial nerves, which I absolutely cannot say on a microphone. But again, mnemonics are there for a reason.
So I come up with it. It helps me to integrate it. So the number one reason you learn it is for yourself, but the second reason you learn anything is that you can teach somebody else. And I find that when I'm giving keynote presentations or I'm on somebody's media and people ask, the listeners, the audience, what they learned, they could go back to the mnemonic, and it's a nice reminder, memory device to be able to, like scaffolding inside their mind to more immediately recall the information. And then, but yes, constructing that acronym or mnemonic also helps me to encode the information so I could better store it and retrieve it, out of our memory.
So is that something like your job requires you to, go on stage in various places around the world and talk to people, go on podcasts, make courses, communicate? Do you think mnemonics are helpful for, any one of us, in terms of helping us learn? Do you think mnemonics are helpful?
I do. I find that they're a simple form of a simple memory device. I mean, we could talk about the memory palace and mind mapping and chaining methods and alphanumeric codes. There's different techniques for improving your memory that are certainly more advanced. But if people this is the first time they're exposed to my content or coaching, then it's a simple way for everyone to understand the information, or at least, have a way of organizing the information that's more memorable.
Okay, let's move on to the I.
Yeah. So the first one, again, is learning management. And then just the other thing for learning, I just want to underline and highlight what we talked about, is teaching. Because if you want to learn something, learn it to teach it. Even if they're listening to this episode, think about somebody who you wish was listening to this episode, and certainly share it with them. But you could also think about, how would you present this? Like if they're going to ask you what you learned from this episode, and you're going to talk about the Limitless kind of day management system, because then you have ownership of the material, right? You're going to learn it better, you're going to focus better, and so on. So learn to teach, wonderful way to improve your learning. So the I is importance management. And so I'm obviously creating words that fit into Limitless, because I feel like it's not so much time management, and we will talk about the T in Limitless is time. It's priority management. You know what I mean? And so the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. And so I feel like to get the most out of the day, we have to be focused on those things that are most important. Because so many of us get really good and at things that maybe in the end don't matter as much. But because we're not intentional about it, or we're mindless about it, then we just feel busy and we feel like we're making progress, but we're running in place. And I think a lot of people, including myself sometimes, we associate busyness with, like, people ask, like, how's your day? And how many times do we say, well, it's really busy? Or how's things going? I'm really busy. And we use busyness almost as a badge of honor, because I think the subtext that we're communicating is like, if we're busy, we're important. You know what I mean? We're valuable because we have so much that we need to do, and so many people are counting on us. And I just want to remind people who are listening that you don't have to fix everything and make every single person in the world happy. So going back to importance, and it's different for every single person, I think it's very important to identify your key values and then work backwards from that. Even when I'm planning my day, again, I'm focused on 3 things personally, 3 things professionally, that thought experiment I do in bed when I wake up, and that's my 6 things, and those are what's important for me that day. And that gives me a target. Like, this is one of those 6 things, this conversation I'm having with you, right? And then when I'm here, I'm completely here, and I know when I go to put my head on that pillow tonight that I could have a level of satisfaction and even cheer because I focused on the things that matter, right? And so, because the opposite of not having that, like, let's go through the opposite of not learning, right? If we're staying the same and we're the same person we were 5 years ago, that probably wouldn't make us incredibly happy.
Well, is it even possible to stay the same? Life is always moving. I'm not entirely sure it is possible for us to stay static. I kind of feel we're either growing or we're contracting. I don't think being static is an option.
Yeah, and that's I really feel like every day we have a chance because we can make a new choice. And so life is difficult for one of 2 reasons. Either we're leaving our comfort zone, or life is difficult because we stay in our comfort zone, right? And and I just want to remind everyone that we could do hard things. Looking in the mirror, part of self-care is not just eating the best brain foods and optimizing your sleep, is looking in the mirror and, loving the person, that reflection that's looking back, that's been through so much, but is still standing.
Yeah. Just on this topic of importance management.
Yeah.
If you're not intentional in the morning about what those important things are, you may also end up in a situation where you have done the important things, but you still feel as though you haven't done anything because you haven't specified it. This idea that our to-do lists are never done. There's always emails accumulating. There's always jobs accumulating. So you could have done those 6 important things, but you wouldn't even realize it. And you would just think that you're not winning at life. And there's a couple of things you mentioned so far which relate to a journal I brought out at the start of the year called the 3-Question Journal, which had in it and has in it the 3 most important questions I think we can ask ourselves in the morning and in the evening. And interestingly enough, they kind of mirror your work a little bit, because one of the questions is, which quality or qualities do I want to showcase to the world today? You ask yourself that in the morning. And it's very similar to the question you ask yourself, in order to tell your wife at the end of the day, I had a great day, what would today need to look like? And people can choose whichever question they want, but I think for me, it's just a very simple question to go, let's say I want to show the world the quality of patience today. And it means I'm thinking about that all day. And if I'm tempted to rush or to get snappy, because it's in the back of my mind that patience is what I want to show today, I'm much more likely to behave in that way. And one of the other questions for the morning is, what is the most important thing I have to do today? And again, people say, well, there's more than one. And yes, of course, we might have lots of priorities, but I personally have found it, and with many patients in the past, very useful to actually narrow it down to one thing. Like initially, for me, it started off with work life and family life. And then over time, it's morphed into one. So I challenge myself each morning to go, what is the most important thing? And sometimes it's to do with family. Sometimes it's to do with my health and working out. Sometimes it is to do with work, but it forces me to make a decision first thing in the morning. And I think that's really powerful.
I like that a lot. And it's said that the word priority was only plural, just a few decades ago. Before it was just, what's the priority? What's the one thing that's most important? And I agree, life and our personal and our work, it's integrated. For me, it's not about balance. It's more about harmony. Balance, for me, it feels like it's very stressful, like a balance beam. And if you look up the definition of balance, it's just equal weight. But I don't necessarily want to spend equal amount of time working as I do working out, right? It's not equal, but harmony is like an orchestra. Not every person contributes the same amount of time, equal, balance, but they all do their thing, and then it creates this amazing symphony, this amazing work of art. And that's how I kind of look at life a little bit more. It's very dynamic and doesn't have to be equally balanced, but where you are is where you are. Like if you're with your kids, you're completely there and you're intentional about it. And so I don't think it's so much about the time, because that time really is a feeling, right? It's a state that you feel. Just like when you said patience, we said for learning management, you could have a to-learn list. You could have a to-be list. Like, I'm going to be patient today. And then, because a lot of times when we're faced with a difficulty or a demand, we usually go in like, what do I need to do? But if we step back and said, before we ask that question, who do we need to be? And if we decide we're going to be patient, the behaviors take care of itself automatically.
It's like going further upstream, isn't it?
Very much so. So you got that be, do, have, share, kind of that syntax of success. But the I is importance, where the things that matter least, that matter most shouldn't be at the effect of the things that matter least. And so I encourage people to get clear on their values. And part of what's important is asking yourself a question, like, what's most important to me in life? And then you could stack those values, or what's most important to me in my career? What's most important to me in my relationship? But if you ask a general question like, what's most important to me in life? Like, what comes to mind for you? Like, what's most important to you in life?
Like, if I don't even think straight away, family, wife and kids comes like almost like a gut reaction.
And that affects your decisions on whether you're going to go speak at an event.
Well, we were talking about this just now, right?
Yeah.
And I was saying to you, because of the age my kids are now, I would make very different decisions, I think, around my work life and my life if I didn't have my children and my marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I just would.
Yeah.
And like we all do, like our life situation determines a lot of the time the decisions we make. But the intentionality with which I've thought about this over the past few years, that's what's changed. Talking about what you're saying, going further upstream, until I intentionally realized how important my family was to me. I've always known it's important to me, but when you really embody it, go, no, do your actions and the way you're spending your time reflect the fact that your family are important to you. And once you get clear and you go, well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, or maybe I'm away more than I would ideally like to be. If I put the family first, if I go, I've mentioned this a couple of times on the show, and one of the reasons I'm not speaking in London this weekend is because it's a weekend. Right? You're at the event. I'm not, because in the summertime, in the springtime, as we're talking, those weekends are really precious to me.
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't mean I'll never do one, but it takes a lot for me to give up that, because it means it's less time with my children whilst they're still at home and at this age. And that clarity has been transformative for me, because it stops a lot of downstream decision making at its roots. Do you see what I'm saying? Yes.
It's one of those things where I'm the same. Family is very, very important to me. And even on going on this trip, I'm knowing I was going to do that. It informed, because there's other values in terms of presenting that's being met in terms of what's most important to me. But knowing I was going to be away, the week leading up to it, I was making all this emotional deposits for my son, to my wife, and spending time, intentional time, not being distracted on my phone, so that when I have to go away, it's more understandable because I've invested in that relationship. So but going back to family, what feeling, what's the underlying value that family gives you?
Well, love.
Yeah.
Connected, supported, nourished. Those are the words that come up for me.
I would say those are your values. Your values are love and connection. Like family is a means to the end values, which is love, connection. Like, for example, my top values in order, because the order matters also, because it's how you make decisions. Love, growth, contribution, adventure. Those are my four primary values in that order. And I make decisions based on those four values. So love, the connections that I have with family and friends. Growth, I want to grow more, because that is a high value of my work and my own personal transformation. My third value is contribution, because I grow, so I have more to contribute. Because if I didn't grow, I wouldn't have a whole lot of value to share. And then recently, the past few years, I added the fourth value consciously, which is adventure. Because I also want to I realized that I wanted to have fun in the process.
Yeah.
Going through life, looking back.
Adventure is a lovely term.
Yeah. It's something, and that informs when I go on trips like I am now, to add things into it that are fun, right?
Yeah.
And
it's funny when you say family also, I feel very strongly, Jim, that, and you like me come from an immigrant family, right? So I don't know your parents' story. My dad, when he came over to the UK and worked ridiculously hard, like many people do, but Dad only slept 3 nights a week for 30 years. He was working days, he was working nights to give us and his family back home in India a better life. So growing up, I didn't see Dad as much as I guess I see my kids, right? But Dad was doing what he felt he had to do, and he probably did have to do it, right? He was supporting, his value probably was family.
Yeah.
My personal happiness doesn't matter. What matters is that I provide Now, I'm speculating because I didn't have that conversation with my dad, but I imagine it would have been. And Dad also became very, very ill on the back of overwork. He had lupus, kidney dialysis for 15 years, and, was very sick for a number of years, for almost 15 years. So having seen all that, I also, when I think of family, I think of the sacrifice that mum and dad made for me and my brother. And I think, rightly or wrongly, I feel that would have been partially wasted if I then do the same thing and I overwork and don't see my children and my wife like dad did, right? So in some ways, I feel I'm almost paying homage to my dad's sacrifice by intentionally making these decisions. He went to a new country with nothing, had to make his name and make his way and deal with discrimination, all kinds of other things. But because he's gone through that, and mum as well, I don't need to. Yeah. Do you see what I mean? So I kind of feel that's part of it for me as well.
And his sacrifice became your blessings, right? And so my parents immigrated to the United States. My dad was 13. He lost both of his parents. So he came because they couldn't afford, he came to live with an aunt and uncle in the States. Didn't speak the language, didn't have any money. They lived in the back of a laundromat that my mom worked at. They had many jobs and they worked really hard.
To make sure you're taking action after watching this video, I've created a free guide to help you build healthy habits. We can all make short-term change, but can those changes become a fundamental part of our life? Often they don't. And that's why in this free guide, I share with you the 6 crucial steps you need to take. They're really, really effective. If you want to get hold of that free guide right now, all you have to do is click the link in the description box below.
I had this mantra growing up, though, that family is most important. For my dad, he would say that every day because he lost both his parents at a very young age. And those life conditions shape your values, right? So no wonder family is important because when you have loss, you structure or restructure your value system. And so that's probably one of the reasons why family is so important for me. And it's, for other people, they have their own stories. But I do believe our ancestors, their sacrifice has become our blessings, right? Yeah. And the gifts that we have today. But for importance, it's honing in what's most important to you. So you ask yourself, what's most important to me in life? And then put those things in order. Because some people want security. And that's most important, is safety because of, their experience. And then they make decisions based on that. And so I think the most important thing has to be the most important thing.
And whatever your answer is, that's okay. It's up to you to answer that.
And it's different for everybody, and it could evolve over time.
Yeah, but at least take the time to ask yourself that question. I think that's the key message, isn't it?
I think having the curiosity to know yourself, and then having the courage to be yourself, that's a big part of it. Okay, so we've got learning management, importance management. What's the M? So the M is when we're talking about, so we haven't even gotten to time management, I think it's really about mind management. So the M is mind management. You need to manage your mind. And so what I mean by that is our minds are the operating system for our life. It's how we perceive the world. It's how we make decisions. It affects how we feel. And even so we could touch on any part of your mind, things like our self-talk, right? Our belief system. And I think managing that is important to win the day. Yes, you need a learning management process. You need to focus on the important things, but you also have to manage your mind. And because your mind is your most powerful asset, wealth and otherwise. So things like our self-talk, things like analyzing the lies that we have. It's like having a lot of, I think it's, this idea of having strong beliefs weakly held. And I don't know who to attribute that. That's not mine, but it's the idea where, our thoughts become more of our reality, but how mindful and intentional are we paying attention to our own thoughts and our own mental programming? Even when we're remembering names, I tell people that your brain is this incredible supercomputer and your self-talk is a program it will run. So if you tell yourself, I'm not good at remembering names, you probably won't remember the name of the next person you meet, because you program your supercomputer not to. And so in Limitless, I talk about lies that we need to unravel around learning, like things like genius is born. There are a lot of people who believe that you're just born with genius or you're not. And, I give evidence that genius is built. And what does that allow you to do? It allows you to say, like, okay, your intelligence is not fixed like your shoe size. You could actually grow it through your own study and discipline and so on. So like another lie is that a lot of people believe is knowledge is power. And it just simply isn't, right? Knowledge has the potential to be power. It becomes power when we apply it and we utilize it, right? A lot of people know what to do. They're very knowledgeable, but they're not doing what they know.
Yeah.
And so that's another lie, but it comes down to managing our mind. And so I feel like it's important, while the importance we're looking at our values for managing our mind, I think it's important to sensitize ourselves to our self-talk, because it's hard for a negative mind to create a positive life, right? When you're always asking like, why me? Or looking for evidence, why does this always happen to me? Why am I not enough? And then we come up with these answers that are not probably the most useful.
Yeah.
And so also analyzing our beliefs, like when's the last time, like when I was 9 years old, a teacher pointed to me in front of the whole class and said, leave that kid alone. That's the boy with the broken brain. And then that was imprinted, that idea that I was broken, but I held on to that for another decade and a half.
I was going to ask you that, Jim, actually. I noticed that when you mentioned that at the start, that is a powerful message to be given at that age, right? So you talk a lot about this empowering mindset, positive self-talk. How did you go about changing your self-talk after such a powerful and influential experience? I mean, did you believe you had a broken brain for many years?
I believed it. And so then my question became, how do I fix it? So my mind management, and maybe it was inspired by my parents. Like my parents, they're not the wealthiest by any stretch, or the smartest, or they're not the most spiritual, and they're not the most health conscious, but they're just really I'm blessed, because I feel like I won the lottery. They're just very good people. They're hardworking and they're extremely kind, right? And to honor my parents, I feel like when I was growing up, and I'm the oldest of 3 siblings, I want to be a good role model for my brother and my sister also as well, because those are my value system, my family, right? In terms of love. And so I guess what got me through this is I wanted to be valuable, like we all do. And so it got me through those tough times, but it wasn't easy, right? Like the daily saying to yourself, I would say like, oh, because I'm broken. But then I started asking, well, broke things, you could fix broke. Can you fix something that's broken? And then I asked, well, how do I make this better? How do I fix this? And then I started getting answers slowly. And with those answers came action. And so I feel like the things that happen to us, this idea where maybe it's not happening to you, it's happening for you, that there's this gift through struggle. Like my 2 biggest challenges were learning, and because of it, public speaking, because I never knew the answer. So don't call on me in class. If I had to give a book report, I would be terrified because I just wasn't as smart as the other kids.
I mean, it's remarkable to hear that, because if you go on YouTube and type in your name, there are countless videos of you on stage,
public speaking on learning
in front of hundreds of people in really nice venues, and you are giving really commanding and very grounded performances on stage. And the reason I share that, Jim, is I think that's empowering, because if you can change from being the kid with the broken brain to being this confident, sought after speaker, I think that journey is inspiring for people who might think at the moment, well, I've got negative self-talk.
Yeah.
I'm scared of even going to my work and having to present in front of my colleagues, right? There'll be people listening right now who feel like that.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, how do they start changing it? Is simply, asking some of these questions we've already covered. Is that how they do it? Is just becoming aware of it? I mean, what do you recommend?
So I think awareness is a starting point for any kind of change. I would also say that a reminder as we're mapping out this process of transformation, wherever you are, where you want to be, that the people you look up to, every professional was once an amateur, right? Every expert was once a beginner, because everybody starts at that place, right? And so I would remind people that our struggles can become strengths. And again, my two biggest challenges were learning and public speaking, and all I do is public speak on this thing called learning. But adversity can be an advantage, because it forces you to grow, and with challenge again comes change. And I think also on another level, we're best suited to support the person we once were, right? So when I feel like when I'm talking to that 9-year-old that was in despair, that didn't believe in himself, that had learning difficulties, that was called broken. And I think we're all really well suited to support the person we once were. So I think all change begins with a choice. There's a quote in Limitless that says, life is the letter C between B and D, where B stands for birth and D stands for death, and life C is choice. And in these difficult times, they can distract you, or these difficult times, they can diminish you, or these difficult times, they can develop you. We decide with the choices that we make. And one of those choices we make is in the area of our mind, like what we're thinking, what we're going to choose to believe, those paradigms and perceptions, frameworks that we have in the world that informs like what we're going to do and how we're going to feel. The regret is always not what they did, but what they didn't do, right? And we know that, the regrets of dying. But somehow the regrets, I could sum up, is they somehow shrunk their life in some way, or limited their life because of what other people would think. They didn't pursue that relationship that they were really infatuated with, but because of what society would think about that relationship. Or they pursued a career path because it was expected by their parents, or some form of that. And I just want to remind people who hear that when you're taking your final breaths, it's not a fun conversation because I tend to be more positive, but I'm going to be very practical. When we're taking our final breaths, think just like how I fast forward at the end of my day. I say, what 3 things happened personally, professionally, if I really said I was happy? You deal with your life also. Because when you're taking your final fast forward to the end of your days, at that time when you're taking your final breath, none of other people's opinions, their expectations are going to matter. None of our fears are going to matter. What's going to matter is how we learned, how we laughed, how we loved, how we lived, right? Yeah. And I just want to remind people, the whole idea of beginning with the end in mind, for me, somebody asked me recently, like, because I was, new father, and I was saying, like, I want to do this, and people are like, you want to make your son proud? Yeah, I want to make my son proud. I want to make, parents proud, all of that, the two, my wife, my son. But when I think about it, the 2 people I want to make proud, really, that 9-year-old boy that was going through all those challenges, like that was being teased and bullied, called broken. I want to look back. I do these mental experiments all the time. I was like, I want to make that, the 9-year-old me proud. And then I was to fast forward 99, hopefully, I'd be doing this a long time. I want to make that guy proud also as well, And so, that's what I can control. Yeah. And I just feel like the life we live, again, are the lessons that we teach. And I think we're all on this quest, to realize and reveal our fullest potential. This book, for over 30 years, I had an opportunity to scale my business, infomercials and franchises and train the trainer and, like all this kind of media, book deals. I never said yes. And in 2019, I got in a car accident. I'll talk about this. And you created a very safe space. So I just appreciate you. I almost died. And it made me think about that, put everything in perspective, because I never want to be famous, right? I want to help people, but I don't need to be known for it just because I'm very introverted and I like to, do things like that. And that helps me have some kind of harmony, not balance, but harmony, kind of like an orchestra, kind of. Not everyone has equal amount of everything, but they play music and it's just your art. But when I had that kind of near-death experience, I signed the book deal that's been in my inbox for like 10 years, because made me think about what I leave behind. And it really kind of made me think, and you might have, have this experience or know people have had that kind of near-death experience. Maybe just think of of legacy, you know. And my next book it's different. It wasn't inspired by death. It was experienced by the birth of my son. So now it's inspired by life, and
Wow.
because I want to leave the world brighter, you know, for him. And it's just become very personal for me in terms of clarity of mission, building better, brighter brains, no brain left behind, but also depth, you know, of purpose.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Jim. And it is a great book, and I can see why it's been so popular and helping so many people. It's really fascinating to hear where it came from, where that energy came from. So I really do appreciate you sharing that. Just before we finish off talking about building better brains, on a slightly, I guess, light-hearted note, juggling is something I've seen you talk about before.
Oh, yeah.
You know, why is juggling so good? And then something I haven't heard you talk about, but I'm interested because I play with my kids regularly table tennis or ping pong. So juggling, what's the deal? Why is it good? Does it matter if we're any good or not? And then maybe table tennis or ping pong, is that also good for our brains, and why?
Yeah. There's a study done here, Oxford University, saying jugglers actually have bigger brains. They create more white matter. I believe as your body moves, your brain grooves. I think the number one reason we have a brain is to control our movement, which is interesting to watch. You know, my son starting to learn how to crawl, and we know that those cross laterals are very important for brain development and, you know, the communication between left and right brain and corpus callosum, that kind of bridging station. So, you know, as you move your body, it challenges different parts of your brain. So it's not just a mind-body connection. There's a body-mind connection that even using your opposite hand, you know, will stimulate different parts of your brain. Even when I challenge, you know, for people who are just alphas and they're very achievement oriented, try using your finger opposite hand.
When speed reading.
Yeah, try using your left. If you're, you know, 11% of the population is left-handed, but if you're listening to this in your right hand, try using your left hand, because potentially, what if it could stimulate the right side of your brain? You know, they say that your left side is very, and this is oversimplification.
Yeah, for sure.
Logical, but your right side more imaginative, creative. But just imagine using your left hand to stimulate different parts or eating, and it'll make you more mindful, certainly. In the beginning, it might be difficult because you're focused on doing it right. Because I used to, like if I asked you to write your name with your opposite hand, it probably won't be so good. And that's how I see learning also. If I asked everyone to write their first and last name, actually you could do it now, write your first and last name on a piece of paper. And then...
oh man, with my left hand?
No, with your dominant hand.
With my dominant hand.
Yeah. And then when you're done, switch hands, and then below it, try below that with your opposite hand, you know, and as you're doing it...
Oh, wow.
And I'm challenging people... You know, that second one, as you're doing it, it takes longer. It feels weird.
Oh, wow.
And
this is...
And the quality is probably not as good. So those are the three differences, right? You could just leave it at that. I get it.
I think I get it too.
But so the second time it takes longer. It was uncomfortable, and the quality is not quite as good. And I often feel like when people are trying to learn something, they're trying to, and they're not getting it, even if they're interested in the topic. Maybe there's just not, maybe the way you prefer to learn it is different than the way the teacher prefers to teach it. And I'm taking my hands and kind of passing them. There's no connection. It's like two ships in the night. And there's no connection because how you learn it is different how it teaches. So maybe it's a learning disability, or maybe it's a teaching disability, or it's just not that communication where you have unification and connected. And so maybe you're trying, here's another way of putting it. Maybe you're trying to learn it with the opposite hand. So it takes longer. It feels uncomfortable, and the quality, the end result is not quite as good as if you were going to use your dominant hand. And that's what, going back to the brain quiz, once you know what your strengths are, you could take the judgment out, you know, and you're not judging a fish, you know, by its ability to climb a tree, you know, that whole saying. You know, you could honor your own strengths and know that you could also develop your weaknesses, certainly, because we give you protocols on how to be more owl or be more cheetah and so on. But going back to the using your opposite hand or something, or table tennis. Table tennis is wonderful for the brain. I've had multiple matches with, Dr. Daniel Amen. It's his favorite brain training.
Really?
Yeah.
Table tennis?
Yeah, table tennis. It's literally what he says is the number one physical activity for the brain. Thinking speed, reaction time, hand-eye coordination. It's a good cardio if you're doing it well. But I love table tennis.
Me and my son particularly play some pretty good, games of reaction speed, everything. And I'm enjoying it. I'm having a blast. But B, it's kind of like I know I've read some what this is good for our brains, and sometimes we'll also play left-handed.
Yeah.
So we're both right-handed because I know it feels different. But after a while, you start to groove and get it. And I'm like, this is good for my brain. I know it is. In fact, there's a arguably the world's greatest ever snooker player, a chap called Ronnie O'Sullivan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if he's like completely right-handed and then he learned this with his weak hand, or whether he's ambidextrous. I couldn't tell you that, but he can play almost as good with his left hands.
Yeah.
And actually, when he initially started doing this in competition, some of his opponents wouldn't shake his hand. They thought he was taking the mickey. They thought he was being unsportsmanlike.
Wow.
Oh, I can, like the quip, I can beat, like you might do with your mates when you're younger. I can beat you playing with my left hand mates, kind of thing. But actually, he's learnt he can play both-handed.
Yeah.
And so on one side of the table, if someone has to use a rest because of just the mechanics, he doesn't have to. He just flips to his other hand and doesn't need to use the rest, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I didn't grow up with a ping pong or table tennis in our home, but it's something that I enjoy now. We have one in our home, and I when people come and they're decent at it, I'll play left. I'm right-handed, but I play left-handed, and I've noticed that my left hand is actually getting, in some ways, my slice is better than, now my backhand is better than my forehand, like my dominant hand.
Oh.
And so, table tennis, ballroom dancing, juggling, all of that is very stimulating for the brain. The juggling, going back to it, you could watch a video. I could juggle, right? But I'm not juggling swords and flaming like chainsaws. But you could watch a YouTube video. What I do, a couple of tips on this though. The reason why I like juggling besides building better brains is it's nice to challenge yourself. It's getting this end result, because I feel like it's a good metaphor for life. Because how many of us don't feel like we're juggling everything in life, right?
Yeah.
But the other part is it actually helps with your reading. Interesting enough, going back to speed reading, because if I'm juggling 3 balls up in the air, I have 2 eyes. I can't look at all 3 balls with just 2 eyes, right? So I have to, instead of my foveal vision, like really narrowing, I have to soften my gaze to get more of my perceptual vision, right? Be able to see more, my field of focus. And that's the kind of focus, similarly, I noticed when I started teaching juggling, is that I read. Because when you look at and I'm opening a book, if you look at this word, liver, right? You look at that word liver, so you have to, there's about 10 words per line, as we mentioned, flush toxins from the liver. Then there's something called fixations. So this is what keeps people, another thing that keeps people reading slow. When you're doing a fixation, that means a fixation is an eye stop. So if there are 10 words per line, you're fixating on each word, you're making 10 stops. And it's kind of like if you're driving on a road.
Keep pressing the brake.
Yeah, it's like boom, boom, boom. It's like, or traffic, it's like boom, boom, 10 times. As opposed to if I look at, the word here, and I could see the word to the left and to the right, or, and then so I could soften my gaze with my peripheral vision, see to the left and to the right, and maybe see 3 or 4 words at a time.
Yeah.
So then it only takes 2, 3 max fixations to get across the page. So instead of, 10 stops, it's less traffic. It's just like 1, 2, and then I'm done. And
can I just say, it's just amazing that you're unpacking the art of reading. For many of us, we learned how to read at school or from our parents, and then we've never given it any thought. I haven't. I just open a book and read, but I'm already thinking, I can use my finger now.
Yeah.
Wow, I think I'm pretty quick anyway. Let's see what happens when I start using my finger. And now I'm thinking, am I, super focused on 1 or 2 words, or can I soften everything, be more relaxed, and have that more peripheral vision? Two practical things that I can implement straight away.
And then in order to do that, you have to relax, right? So when I'm juggling like this, I open, I expand so I could see this, field of play. So I could take everything in. Same thing when I'm looking at a page, or a line. And then and also that relaxed state it's not putting me in fight or flight, right? Sometimes when we're so narrow focused on something that,
Yeah, no, I love it.
and then it's more taxing when you're looking at, like, think about even just the muscles in your eye having to go from da 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 da, and then sometimes what we're doing is regressing, we're back skipping. Have you ever noticed you reread words or or reread whole lines, and that takes up a lot of time? And I want to honor the self-reflection and the awareness that reading is a skill. And it can be improved through training. But when's the last time we took a class called reading? We were 6. So the difficulty and demand has increased tremendously. But how we actually read something is the same way as we did as a child.
Yeah.
And we haven't upgraded those skills. And that's why I think this is so important. I'll tell you the big thing in terms of what, and by the way, when you understand your peripheral vision, then you don't even have to go across the page. You could indent, a handful of whatever centimeters to the left and to the right and in between. So you don't even have to go all the way across. You could just stay in the middle and still see what's to the left and the right. And there's save another 25%, right? And this adds up every single day. You're getting that time back. The other thing is the thing that's actually challenging the most for readers. Have you ever noticed when you're reading something, you hear that inner voice inside your head reading along with you? You hear that voice inside your head? Hopefully it's your own voice. It's not like somebody else's voice. The reason why it's a challenge is if you have to say all the words inside your mind in order to understand, that means your reading speed is limited to your talking speed, but not your thinking speed, right? The reason why most people read 200 to 250 words per minute is that's the average rate of speech. And can you understand faster? Of course, but you can't talk that fast. So let me ask you the underlining, so we're reevaluating what we learned. Do you need to say words, right? Like computer, New York City, in order to understand what those words are? No, because you've seen them how many times? 100,000 times. And they're called sight words. Words that you've seen thousands of times, by sight. You don't have to pronounce by sound. And 95% of what we're reading on a regular basis are sight words. Just like when you see traffic signs or a stop sign and it says stop, you don't say stop, but you understand what it means, right? And so that's most of the words. And
could this be one of the reasons why I haven't done this enough to say this for sure, but I think, like sometimes when I try audiobooks, like I love listening to podcasts, but I'm not sure I love listening to audiobooks.
Yeah.
Like I much prefer real books.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's because I think I'm a quick reader. Do I maybe find like the audiobook too slow for the speed that I like to go at? Could that be a reason?
Yeah, and I'll give you a couple of distinctions.
But I love podcasts.
Yeah. So some people, let's deconstruct this and pack it. So some people will listen to a podcast or an audiobook at faster speed, right? They'll do it at 1.5 or 2. They might be doing it right now, right? Because no one can speak that fast, but we can understand that fast, right? And that's just another evidence that we could be reading faster than we currently are. Yeah. When people are mostly reading, they're reading one word at a time. And I'll tell you, if you get distracted while you read, which is a lot of people, it's because you're reading too slow. Yeah. Let me say that again. Most people think they get distracted because they're not interested in the topic, and that could be a contributing factor. But most people get distracted because they're reading too slow. Because your brain is this incredible supercomputer. And when you're reading, you're feeding this supercomputer one word at a time. Metaphorically, you're starving your mind. And if you don't give your brain the entertainment it needs, it'll seek stimulus elsewhere in the form of distraction. So you start thinking about other stuff.
I love that. Right? It makes total sense.
It's like if you're driving. If you're driving down your wonderful neighborhood here, you're not really focused on driving, right? But if you're racing a car at F1 and are you like if you're driving slow, you're thinking about the dry cleaning, about what you should have said on the podcast. You'd be thinking about 5. You could be drinking coffee, texting. You'd be 5 different things when you're going slow, because you could be that. But if you're going fast, are you thinking about? Are you trying to text? Are you trying to drink coffee? Are you thinking about the dry cleaning? No, because the speed gives you the focus, and the focus gives you the comprehension. So most people think if I read any faster, I won't understand it. Actually, because we have more data than anybody. We have our flagship speed reading program has been around for a long time. we actually find that the people who are reading faster actually have better comprehension in general because they have better focus. Because when they're going faster, there's no time to be distracted and thinking about other things and trying to get. Some people read so slowly they fall asleep because they're just bored.
Yeah.
And then they're multitasking and everything because they're not giving their brain the stimulus it needs. So it entertains itself in other ways. So there's a big science and art to this. Like in the training that we do, we show people, because there's no quick tip for it, on how to reduce the subvocalization. So you're only saying the words that are new to you, right? And, the words you have to pronounce because they're not familiar to you. And then we teach all the different ways to take notes and to study and underline, do all the fancy stuff. But the idea here is, prioritize reading because leaders are readers. You read to succeed. Reading is your mind would exercise your body. That's the whole mindset part. And give yourself a real purpose to read. Don't just read randomly. Like you read for purpose because you want to implement it. How can I use this? Why must I use this? When will I use this? And then the method, upgrade your reading skills and abilities, because it's just like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? By Stephen Covey, the 7th habit, sharpen the saw. If you have all this wood you need to cut and you have a blade, that's dull, when do you want to sharpen it? At the end, in the middle, or the beginning? In the beginning, because if you wait to the end, you just struggled a lot, you wasted a lot of time, you suffered, you stressed. And when you sharpen the saw, like this, Limitless will help you read every other book. This is like Lord of the Rings, like the one ring that controls them all. Limitless is like the one book that will help you learn, read, and remember them all.
Yeah.
You go through this, and then everything after that, you sharpen the saw, and it's just a whole lot easier.
Jim, I could talk to you for hours. There's so much wisdom about memory, learning, focus, attention that we haven't even got into. Of course, you've got all your online courses, you've got your Limitless book, you've got your own podcast. So there's plenty of resources that people can go to learn more. Information is not enough to make change in your life. You have to take action. So to help you take action after watching this video, I've created a free nutrition guide for you. This contains the 5 most important practices I've seen in over 2 decades of seeing patients. They work for you no matter what your dietary preference. There's a step-by-step action plan to help you implement those changes in your life. If you want to receive that free guide right now, just click on the link in the description box below. I've really enjoyed this conversation. As you know, this podcast is called Feel Better, Live More. When we feel better in ourselves, we get more out of our life. Your whole mission is to help us have better brains, better functioning brains, which is going to help work, relationships, hobbies, whatever it might be. So right at the end of this conversation, I wonder if you could leave my audience with some wisdom, some insights, some sort of practical tips. If they feel inspired by what they've heard, what can they do right now to start improving how their brains function?
Yeah. Okay. So I would say within the next hour, or definitely the next day, put something into action, right? The knowledge is not only power, it could be profit if it's utilized. And I don't mean just financial profit. Certainly the faster you can learn, the faster you can earn. Most people listening to this, it's not like 100 years ago. You're not compensated for your muscle power like it was back then. It's your mind power. It's not your brute strength. Today it's your brain strength. So I would say prioritize your ability to learn how to learn. If there was a genie could grant you any one wish, you would ask for, limitless wishes. But if, let's say I was your learning genie, I could help you become an expert in any one subject or any one skill. Yes, you could pick ping pong, or you could think about neuroscience. But if you could say like, hey, I want to be excellent at learning how to learn, every area gets easier. Medicine, money, martial arts, music, Mandarin, everything gets easier. So I would say the first thing is prioritize learning how to learn, whether it's reading better, improving your memory focus. These are not things that you have. These are things that you could do. And genius leaves clues, right? So you can learn how to learn, right? Whether it's through us or just finding it online, learn how to learn. The second thing I would say is just read more. That's kind of obvious, but I'm just reiterating what we've talked about here. Leaders or readers, just even if it's just 10 minutes a day, make it super easy. I carry a book with you. And when you have downtime, I do so much of my reading just like when I feel like time opens up. Meeting starts 15 minutes late, and that 15 minutes adds up. So I just like picking up a book, or if I'm waiting online at the DMV or something like that, is to read more. Third thing, think about your dominant question. I'm talking about things that, we've gone over because it's a rapid review. Think about what your dominant questions are, because you change your questions, you change your life. You know, maybe your question is, how do I make this moment even magical? What's the best use of this moment? What's most important to me in the, right now? You know, or how can I make that 9-year-old, version of me proud? You know, whatever your focus goes, that's where the energy is definitely going to flow. And then the last two things I would say, take the quiz. A small, simple step you could do is post your quiz result and tag us both, so we get to see what you are, and share one thing you're going to do for a better brain. Like, share what animal you are. Get a nice, we created these AI animals, personalized. You could post it online, tag us both. I'll actually gift out 3 copies of Limitless, just to 3 random people who do that.
Amazing.
So it's a small, simple step you could take to really show your fans, your followers, your friends, your family, like something new about you. And then, because you tag us, I'll get to see it, and I'll repost some of those. And then the last thing is, teach it. My philosophy on life is you learn to earn to return. You learn so you can earn, so you have more to be able to return. And I think one of the best ways of returning something is to teach it to somebody else. You take advantage of something called the explanation effect. The explanation effect is exactly what it sounds like. If you learn with the intention of explaining to somebody else, you're going to learn it easier and better. You're going to own it, because you're not going to use, when you sum up what you learned here, and that's active retrieval, that's another practice you could use. You're not going to use necessarily my words, our words to explain it. You're going to use your own words, and then you're going to have that ownership. And I think that's the most beautiful thing, right? If you gave me a certain amount of currency and I gave you the same amount of currency, nothing happens. It's the same thing, right? But if I share a new idea with you and you share a new idea, that's why your community is so amazing. And I'm a big fan of your show and your YouTube. I subscribe to, it always shows up early, and even on social media, also on Instagram. But then I share a new idea with you and you share a new idea with me. All of a sudden we have 2 brand new ideas. Yeah. And all I just ask is that you don't keep it an idea, you turn it into some kind of implementation. Because that's the ultimate thing, is the integration. When your mindset, your motivation, and the methods, when your head, your heart, and your hands are all aligned, then you're living a limitless life. And I truly believe there's a version. If you're still listening to this, I promise you, I'm talking to the person listening to this right now, there's a version of yourself that's patiently waiting. And the goal is you show up every single day until you're introduced. Lens management. Lens, for me, is a tool to focus. All right? So this is like your focus management. Mm-hmm. You have to manage your focus, because your focus is reality. If people want to remember names, it requires focus. If people want to remember what they read, it requires focus. Because if you aren't focusing on when you're hearing the name, you're not going to remember the name. If you read a page in a book, get to the end and forget what you just read, you don't have focus. Because focus will give you the comprehension and the retention that you want. Now, when I say lens, it's interesting. Like, I don't know if you did this. When I was a kid in the summertime, I would take out like a magnifying glass, a lens, and people would burn things, right? Like leaves or whatever. And I would do that. And I found it really interesting, because that point that's doing the burning, it's very sharp, it's very bright. And isn't it interesting the words we choose to use to describe people? If we say somebody is sharp, we say they're bright, what are we implying? That they are smart, right? That they are intelligent. Someone's bright, they're intelligent. Maybe they're not smarter, maybe they're just better focused, right? But what that lens is doing. So lens management is focus management. And I think it's important to manage your focus. And one of the best ways of doing that we talked about is asking questions, right? Questions are an incredible focusing tool. It's like, you ask yourself, like, where are the minis, right? And you ask that question repeatedly, and it becomes almost a dominant question. So you start seeing minis everywhere. Did they magically manifest in your neighborhood? No, they were always there. But as I mentioned, your brain is a deletion device. It's trying to keep most information out. It only lets in the things that are important to you. And how do you let it know it's important? You ask questions, because that means you're interested and there's some kind of emotion, but payoff on it.
And that's why I love that question each morning. What is the most important thing I need to do today? Yeah. Because just imagine you do that every day. That quickly builds up, right? Yeah. It very quickly adds up. That means each day you've directed your focus going, this is important. Hopefully you complete that task, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
You do that for 365 days.
Oh my goodness.
You know, that's a lot of important things that you've done.
Yeah.
And it's, again, yes, it speaks to importance management, the I, but it also speaks to lens and directing your focus.
Even when you're reading a book, right? And we talked about this in the last episode on speed reading and smart reading. If you ever read a page in a book, got to the end and just forgot what you just read, I guarantee you don't have enough questions. Because if you had questions about what you're reading, like how does this relate to what I already know? You know, how am I going to use this? Whatever your questions are, then you'll be reading it and you're like, oh, there's a mini.
Don't you have, I think I saw this one of your videos, Jim, like a lot of people listen to this show because they want to live a healthier and happier life.
Yeah.
And often they're thinking about habits that they can implement into their life. I think you have something where you say for any habit you want to bring into your life, you've got to ask yourself 3 questions. Is that ringing a bell?
Yeah. I mean, for learning especially, when we talked about earlier that knowledge is not power, it's a potentially power, it becomes power when we apply it. I think how we take knowledge and turn it into action, the 3 questions I ask when I'm learning something, and I can give you questions for every kind of situation that I ask myself. When I'm learning specifically, I'm asking, how can I use this? Mm. Because when I'm reading, it engages my focus. So if we're talking about lens management, the questions are dictating, I get pulled through what I need to. I'm pulling it in. Like you can't push a rope. If you like, you can't push this, but you could pull it, right? And so the idea here is the questions pull information in. So I ask myself, how can I use this? Then I ask myself, why must I use this? So it goes from my head to my heart. Then the third question is when? When will I use it? Again, one of the most important productivity performance tools you have is your calendar. But I think for every hour people spend listening to this conversation or reading a book or whatever, a general rule is to spend an equal hour putting it into action, right? You spend an hour listening to a podcast, at least spend that another hour or some time putting it into play.
Yeah, I think those questions are brilliant because yes, it applies to learning. It applies to a habit that they hear, right? They think, oh, that sounds interesting. Okay, how can I use this habit? Okay, that's getting them to think a little bit. Yeah. Why must I use it?
Yeah, because without that why, without reasons, you won't get the results. Even if people forget names, yes, part of it is what we talked about, their attention. They're not focused on the name. But part of it is there's no emotion. Like, why do you want to remember the person's name?
Yeah.
Maybe it's to show the person respect. Maybe it's to get a referral. Maybe it's to do a sale. Maybe it's to practice these things I learned on the podcast.
And then it's when will I?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then it goes from your head to your heart to your hands, meaning how can I use this? You're coming up with all the ideas in your head. Why must I use this? Right? The heart. And then the hands. When? Yeah. When am I going to act on this? And so I feel like when you have those 3 things in play, there's less friction.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
To learn something, to do anything at all, or even to take some kind of action that you need to take that's, might be even uncomfortable. But the idea behind this, again, is one of the tools we have to focus our lens is the power of questions. Like even going back to some of the other management, like the importance management, you could ask yourself, use your lens in your mind management to say, what's the best use of this moment, right? Like something like that just changes it. You take a pause and you're like, okay, it recenters you on what's most important. Or questions like Peter Thiel has this question, who's an angel investor, says, what if I had to reach my 10-year goal, but I only had 6 months to do it? That's a different kind of question because you can't possibly work hard enough to do it in 6 months. So you have to ask a new question to be able to get to that goal, right? So questions, I believe, are the answer.
In the chapter on thinking towards the end of Limitless, there's a lot of that in there, which I find really, really interesting. Okay, what's the E?
Yeah, so the E in Limitless is energy management. If you want to get the most out of the day, you need energy. And I just want to remind everybody that you don't have energy, you do it. So we talked about this in the earlier episode. Take the nouns in your life and turn them into verbs. meaning sometimes we hypnotize ourselves into submission and we say, I don't have motivation today. I don't have energy. I don't have focus. I don't have a good memory. These are not things you have. These are things you do. And the benefit of turning it into a verb, a process, is you get your agency back, right? We talked a lot about in the previous episode about personal responsibility, right? And having agency and being a thermostat, not a thermometer, right? A thermometer reacts to the environment, a thermostat sets the environment, right? It knows the temperature, but it also sets a standard and the environment reacts to it. And we want to act more like a thermostat because we are the pilot of our lives. We're not the passengers, right? Going with the winds of wherever other people and agendas and everything moving us towards something. So you take the nouns, you turn them to verbs. You don't have focus. There's a process for focusing. You don't have a memory. There's a process for memorizing something that we teach. You don't even have energy. You generate energy. So when I say energy management, in order to win the day, you need high levels of energy. And then, so that's where the opposite of everything I talked about earlier about the bad habits is, instead of adding a bad brain diet, have a good brain diet, right? Instead of, all those negative thoughts, have some empowering thoughts, because that energizes, that's a higher vibration, right? Instead of being sedentary, you move, right? And movement generates energy.
It does.
And then supplementation. There's supplements. We have a whole new chapter in the book on nootropics, neuronutrition, where cognitive health comes from that brain foods, right? The avocados, the blueberries, the wild salmon, the turmeric, the green leafy vegetables, if your diet allows the eggs, the choline in eggs, acetylcholine leads to good brain health, cognitive health, for good cognitive health. And if you don't get those, if you're not getting the wild salmon or the sardines or the flax seeds, you could supplement with omega-3, DHAs, right? If you're not getting the turmeric, you can supplement with curcumin. If you're not getting the eggs, the choline, you could supplement with choline, right? And because, we don't always eat a pristine diet, none of us really do. So you get your levels tested, your vitamin D, all the essentials for good cognitive health, right? And you supplement where needed. And there are also ingredients that have been shown through human studies to boost, that's cognitive health. This is cognitive performance.
So subtly different, right?
Yeah, that's where the nootropics would come in. These are science-based ingredients that will affect your mental performance, your executive functioning, your memory, your focus, your mood, and your mental energy, right? So it's not cognitive health. Get your foundational vitamins and minerals, essential fatty acids, and so on. Cognitive performance, there are these substances like caffeine, right? Like creatine. Most people associate creatine to working out, but it's one of the most studied substances, and it's also been shown to be really good for your cognitive health and cognitive performance. For mitochondria, for mental energy, to stave off like sleeplessness, like when you're not to be able to offset some of the negative effects of not getting a good night's sleep and so on. And some of my favorite ingredients that have been shown to boost focus, memory, mental energy. Some of them, they range. Bacopa.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's pretty popular. Some of your audience might have heard of it. Ayurvedic medicine, wonderful, great for your memory.
And there's a whole new chapter, isn't there, in Limitless? Since we last spoke, you've re-released the book it's an expanded edition.
Yeah.
And how come there's a chapter on nootropics? Is that because people were asking for that? Has there been new research?
So the book came out in 2020, which was an interesting time for a book. We recently updated it for a post-pandemic AI world. So all the original great content updated, and then we added many new chapters. A chapter on AI, how to use AI to enhance your HI, like your human intelligence. So for me, AI is not artificial intelligence, it's more augmented intelligence, right? For me, technology has always been like a support tool, something to partner with to make your life easier, right? Or better, or improve your progress. So we show people in that chapter, how do you use AI to enhance your intelligence, to to your performance and everything. Because I think the future of education is really personalized learning. And there's different aspects of that, of using it. Even something simple like if I said something like neuroplasticity, people could go, and they don't know what that is. They could go into an AI chatbot and say, explain to me neuroplasticity in a fun way as if I'm 10 years old. And then it'll put out a couple of paragraphs and give you a foundation to build on, right? And that's a way of learning faster. And every technique in the memory technique, and the memory is probably the largest chapter in the book, memory improvement, how to remember names, languages, speeches without notes, and facts, figures. A lot of the techniques you could go into we talk about memory palaces and chain linking and story methods. You could use an AI program to say, hey, I need to memorize this. Use the memory palace, create a memory palace for me to be able to easily memorize this script.
Can I ask on memory? I know we covered a lot of it in our first conversation, but I was thinking about this yesterday, this idea that there's many things we want in life.
Yeah.
And we kind of understand that to get them, we need to work at them. For example, if we want to run faster, we don't just expect that to happen. We sort of understand that if, let's say I do a 5K every Saturday, if I want to get a faster time, I will need to do some sort of training to get that. But I kind of feel with memory, we just start to worry about it when it starts to fail or when we perceive it to be failing. We just take it for granted. Whereas really, if memory is such an important part of our experience of life, which it is, we kind of need to be taking active steps to maintain it and improve it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I believe there's no such thing as a good or bad memory. There is a trained memory and an untrained memory. And unfortunately, like a number of important subjects, not taught in school. School taught us what to memorize, math, history, science, but there was never a class on how to memorize or how to remember. Socrates said learning is remembering. And, I wrote the chapter in Limitless on memory in Greece. I found out there was a goddess of memory, mnemonics, and her children are the 9 muses of science, literature, and art. So the 9 muses, science, literature, and art, their mother is memory.
That's cool.
And that's so important because people ask, why do I have to remember something if it's online? And I can give people a number of reasons. But in order, our lives are a reflection of the decisions we've made. We've covered that, right? The choices we've made. But you can only make a good decision based on the information that you know at that time. And if you know it, it presupposes you've remembered it, right? Yeah. And there is no, Socrates said again, there is no learning without remembering. And that's why I think memory is so very important. So to go to your point, when you're talking about marathons or 5Ks or, physical fitness, I think it's very important to be mentally fit today. And memory is a big part of that. And memory, regardless, as you're listening to this, of your age or stage in life, we can all improve. And with simple things that make a big difference.
There's a game that's very popular in the UK. I think it's called I Went to the Market. Okay, and we often play it as a family. And maybe it's not from the UK, maybe it's from the US or another country. But this idea that, let's say it's my family, my daughter might start and go, I went to the market and bought an avocado. And then my wife will go, I went to the market and bought an avocado and an apple.
Yeah.
Then my son will have to do apple on, and so on. And you keep going until someone gets it wrong.
Yeah.
Is that a good game to train and practice on memory? And if it is, how might you tweak it to make it even better?
Yeah, good question. So memory is use it or lose it. And I also believe that how you do anything is how you do everything. And so I feel like anything that challenges your brain is forcing you to make those connections and exercise your mind, right? But it's also how we're doing it. Meaning, let's say, back in school, I wasn't good at anything. The only class I did well in, like all through grade school was typing. And it was just because when I would visit my great aunt and uncle, they had no toys in the house. They would just have this rusty, dusty typewriter. So that's all I had to play with. And in middle school, let's say age around 12, I went to a class on typing. This was back before computers, so we had typewriters, and they would rate just like how we rate people's reading speed, your typing speed. And for the first time on the chalkboard, I was number one because I was the fastest. And my name was Kwik, which is my real name, my father's name, my grandma. I changed it to do what I do, to teach speed reading and speed recall and speed thinking. But I use this hunt and peck method, I invented, right, using my 2 index fingers. And a week into it, a teacher was like, hey, we're going to teach everybody how to type. And I just wanted to take the test because this would be the first test I do well on. I was like, you don't have to teach me. I got this. But she was like, no, Jim, you have to use all your fingers, all 10 fingers, and there's home keys and everything. And I tried it. And what do you think happened to my typing speed?
Yeah.
It went down, right? Because it was awkward and it was different. And then, so what do? I go back to my hunting and pecking using my 2 fingers, right? Interesting thing happened after a week or two. Like I went from number 1 as the fastest typer to number 3 to number 7 to number 13, all the way down to the bottom because all the other kids learned it using their 10 fingers. And it took my slow brain all that time to realize, hey, that's not fair. They're using 5 times more fingers. So I have to work 5 times harder in order to keep up. But that's similar to, it's not, practice doesn't make perfect, right? Practice makes permanent. Perfect practice could potentially lead to perfection. But if we're practicing the hunt and peck method with 2 fingers, I'm only going to get as good as what I could do. And it's similar to what we talked about in the last episode about speed reading. Reading is a skill, and it can be improved through training. But the last class most people took on reading, they were like 6 or 7 years old. So most people are still reading like they're 5, 6, 7 years old the same way. The difficulty and demand has increased a lot, but they read it the same way they learned it. And they can keep on practicing their old ways, but it's like practicing with 2 fingers to type. You're going to get a cap if you're because this technique is inherently limited, right? As opposed to something that's more efficient using more of your fingers. Same thing with reading. And going back to memory, yes, it's good to engage your brain by memorizing the avocados and the apples and everything else. And if you were to memorize it using a technique that you could get better at, like one of the techniques that we teach in Limitless, then you're getting really good at techniques that are at a higher level, like typing, and you could take those same techniques and use it to memorize other things.
If you enjoyed that conversation, then I think you are really going to enjoy this one.
It's only when you learn what to do with your unhappiness that you can really break through and find stable happiness.